very busy week in Missouri politics. Presidential race in full steam and now heading towards Missouri. And state politics with the sessions is very hot, and we're here to talk about it with former Congressman and now candidate for Lieutenant Governor Russ Carnahan. Welcome to This Week in Missouri Politics.
Hey, great to be with you.
Very glad you were able to make it on. Let's first talk about the race. So you've jumped back in, both feet, running for Lieutenant Governor. Why?
You know, I guess I'm a combination of optimistic and stubborn. I love this state, but I've gotten great encouragement from folks around the state to get into this race, and I believe our state can do better. And I'm going to jump into this race and try to make that difference.
You come from a tradition of family in public service. Your father, mother, sister. Is that when you left public office? Was that something that brought you back in? Was that tradition in your family?
Yeah, certainly. I grew up with a great respect for that. Watching my dad, the way he connected with people, and even today. You know, several times every week, somebody will walk up to me and talk about how he touched their lives and made a difference. And to me, it's a great legacy, but it's also really important. I've been in the public sector and the private sector in my career, but it's just a great way to give back and make a difference in a state that I love.
Sometimes you find it hard, though, that people may short sell you a little bit because they say, well, your name and some of the advantages that came with.
You know, I like to say it's a two-edged sword. You know, you sort of get the pluses and the minuses. Obviously, I'm very proud of my family and heritage, but nothing lands in your lap in politics. I mean, you've got to go out there and work it. You've got to earn it the old-fashioned way, and that's always been my approach.
One of the things Lieutenant Governor does that I think a lot of our readers will care about is there's a bunch of small things, presiding over the Senate, you can do. And when you have a superminority like the Democrats have in the state Senate, sitting in that chair can help do a bunch of very small things. Is that a commitment you've made to the Senate caucus that you'll be in that chair presiding over the Senate?
Yeah, I think it's an important job of the Lieutenant Governor. It's spelled out, and I intend to take that job seriously. And it's something where I think the role of someone who's presiding, I've presided over the House when I was in the House of Representatives, and the important thing is to be fair. The majority is going to work their will eventually, but it's important in the chair to be able to be sure that all sides get a fair hearing.
I think in the Senate, though, where it's that saucer that cools things, it's even more important and maybe even advantageous to have somebody of the opposite party in the chair ruling on things. I mean, the Senate's sort of meant to slow some things down, right?
Certainly, that's been the design in our legislative process. But again, I think it's important whoever, you know, whatever party or whoever is presiding, that they be fair, give all sides a hearing, and at the end of the day, that the process works.
Look at the political climate in the state. Attorney General Koster at the top of the ticket's obviously going to be a very strong candidate. Did that impact your decision to run for Lieutenant Governor? Was the politics in the state would be pretty advantageous at this point with him leading the party?
Yeah, I think Attorney General Koster has put together a very strong campaign. I think he's in a very good position to be able to be the next governor. I don't think he takes anything for granted. So I'm very optimistic about what the ticket is looking like and coming together, and I'm proud to be working to be a part of that.
You know, you've mentioned ethics. The Lieutenant Governor's job is one that's an executive branch job that has some legislative branch responsibilities. What are a couple of things that you believe the legislature could do this year, as far as ethics goes, to actually change public perception?
Yeah, I think it's important. Obviously, the legislature has taken some big hits in the media. And I think it's really important to take a look at the things that have set Missouri apart. We're the only state that doesn't have any campaign contribution limits. We don't have limits on lobbyist gifts or the revolving door of people leaving the legislature to go lobby. So I think those are some issues that are on the plate. There's certainly been some activity in that area, and I'm hopeful that those will be addressed really for the good of the legislative process, but also just to help the trust and perception of the public.
Don't you think, though, before, it seems to me limits are the campaign contribution limits are the one thing that won't happen this year. It seems to me like if one party is going to say we should have limits, they're almost going to have to practice what they preach to have maybe the credibility in the legislature to pass that. It's awfully hard for the governor to come and give a state of the state and say we should have campaign contribution limits right after he's cashed a $50,000 check. I think that's a challenge for some folks. So these other things may make more sense, but don't you think that one party is going to have to actually practice that before they enact it?
I think it's hard because people tend to not want to unilaterally disarm.
Well, it's a huge disadvantage,
and play by the existing rules, but at the same time, there needs to, I think, be a collective movement because I think, frankly, both parties, even though they may see an advantage in some way, there's also some big downsides, but the biggest downside, I think, is just the eroding trust in the people and the way that they look at the system.
It seems to me there may be something done on a lobbyist gift, or there's some arcane rules about if you leave the office, becoming a lobbyist, or how would you do the campaign funds. Very few of those really have a major impact on the process. Do you believe at this session, with this legislature and this governor, there will be something meaningful on ethics reform?
I'm hopeful. I think that I know it's a difficult environment, but I think there are some serious people in both parties that are wisely looking at some things to do that are practical, but also that will help some of that public perception out there that certainly the legislature has taken these big hits over.
Well, let's talk transportation. You have a history in your family being rural Missourians that was able to be successful in statewide politics. The 15-year plan, there's a bunch of other things that Governor Carnahan administered when he was in office. What can the state do on transportation? It seems like everybody understands it's a problem.
Yeah, and one of the first things I did when I was elected to Congress, I sought out as my #1 priority to get on the Transportation Committee because we had in Jefferson County a couple of super dangerous roads with nicknames like Blood Alley and Death Valley, and to address some of those critical issues. But if you look at our entire state, I mean, we have critical transportation issues, and transportation is one of the things that's always set Missouri apart. So I think it's going to be unlikely to get anything major through the legislature this year. But I think in a longer-term plan, really building a coalition of business leaders, transportation advocates, people that build our road systems here.
The agriculture community has always been a part of it.
Agriculture community, it's critical. It's a lifeblood to be able to move our product around the nation and globally. So I think if we put together a package with the broad coalition, I always believe you tell people what they're going to get, and this is what it's going to cost, and ultimately the people are going to decide.
I think MoDOT's done a lot to instill confidence. The public has confidence in MoDOT, unlike other times in the state's history.
I think for the most part that's true. I mean, they've been responsible with limited budgets. They tried to stretch them. They tried to, trim the fat in other areas, but ultimately we're far short of what's needed to maintain our roads, our rail, our water resources, and we've got to address that in the next few years.
Can't let you go without talking about the presidential race. Who are you with on the Democrat side first?
I've endorsed Secretary Clinton. I think by far she has the greatest experience to be able to really hit the ground running and be an active and effective president, and so that's what I've done.
I got to ask you about the Trump phenomenon. I mean, the debate this week was bizarre, but you had to watch it. But he is connecting with people undeniably on a different level than most politicians do. What is your take on this oddity of American politics?
It's certainly been the most entertaining thing in politics.
No question.
But, I don't really want an entertainer to be my doctor or my lawyer or my teacher, and certainly not our president. So again, I think it's very entertaining, and I think ultimately people are going to get to the point where they're beyond entertainment, and they're going to make some serious decisions about what they want in their next president.
It seems like there's a toughness that he exudes that does draw people. You look at some of these trade deals. It's nice to sit at a think tank and say we should have these trade deals. They're not working. China is taking advantage of us. Is Hillary Clinton strong enough? Because I believe Donald Trump might be, to look them in the face and say, taking advantage of America is over. Is she strong enough to do that?
No matter how you feel about Secretary Clinton, she's been through the rough and tumble of politics. So I think it would be tough to say she's not tough enough for the job. But certainly there is a chord out there. And I think a lot of it it gets back to what we talked about with people just frustrated with the system, that people aren't listening. And I think it's incumbent upon anybody in elective office or as a candidate to be out there listening and learning and then building coalitions around issues that people care about. So that to me has always been my focus, and And in Missouri, there aren't enough Democrats to get things done by themselves, not enough Republicans. You have to build coalitions around issues to really make major progress.
Well, we're glad you joined us here today on This Week in Missouri Politics, and we hope you'll come back as the campaign moves forward.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. We'll be right back with our Opinion Maker panel, but first we'll leave you with this week's leading Missouri economic indicators.
All across Missouri, our new car and truck dealers are building strong local economies. When you buy a car or truck in Missouri, you're helping to support over 20,000 Missouri families who rely on the auto industry for good-paying local jobs. You're also helping fund our communities, schools, first responders, and our roads because dealers generate millions of dollars in tax revenue. Missouri's automobile dealers have been the foundation of our communities for generations and for generations to come. The Missouri Automobile Dealers Association, the heart of Missouri.
For more than a century, the St. Louis Carpenters Union has shaped our communities. Through trusted alliances, we deliver skilled professional craftspeople while our business partners provide the kind of quality jobs that keep our economy humming. It's a blueprint that has worked since 1882. Turning Missouri into a right-to-work state stalls progress, wipes out jobs, and kills momentum. Right to work is wrong for everyone. Let's keep Missouri moving forward. Visit carpdc.org to learn more.
Welcome back to This Week in Missouri Politics. We're joined by our Opinion Maker panel now. For the first time on, Jay Houghton. Jay, welcome to This Week in Missouri Politics.
Thank you.
Ashley McDonald of Farm Bureau, first time on as well. Welcome to This Week.
Thanks for having me.
Old friend Blake Lawrence, Chief of Staff to Senator Jamilah Nasheed from here in St. Louis. Welcome back on the show.
Great to be here.
And one of the people who's on our first shows ever, Sean Nicholson, no longer with Progress of Missouri. We've had your replacement. She's very articulate, and you left it in good hands. Let's start with you on paycheck protection.
Sure.
That passed with veto-proof majorities for just public sector employees. This seems like it's going to become law.
Yeah, I think it's a really unfortunate development this week. This is an attack on everyday heroes. We're talking about first responders. We're talking about the everyday heroes who take care of our veterans and our state homes. I think it's purely a political move. As current Representative Caleb Rowden said, this is a purely political bill. He's one of the dozen or so that have flip-flopped in the last couple of years. It's just a really unfortunate development this week.
Give our viewers, some call it paycheck protection, some call it paycheck deception. Give me the really short definition of what this does.
It creates new administrative hurdles for public employee unions in an attempt to weaken their political and economic power. So it's a purely political bill that has little impact on the economy at all.
Blake, in the Senate, there were some folks thought the filibuster would go longer, ended around midnight. Was this part of a bigger deal to end the filibuster then?
Well, those who were watching the floor noticed that Senator Nasheed, my boss, began the debate pretty passionately, if you will. There were some words, yeah. But I think that reflects a lot of the passion that she had, as well as many of her colleagues, about this issue. I mean, We feel in the Democratic caucus that this is something that comes up every year, one way or another. I believe this is a way to wedge in a right-to-work issue. If there's one thing that Senator Nasheed really hates, it's a fiscal note that doesn't really pass the smell test. This is not a fiscal note of $0. It's going to require state employees to go in, reauthorize each one of their fees, each one of their dues, every time that they do it. It can't be a zero fiscal note. So I just think that it's something that's pushed through, it's shoehorned in, and it's not something that a lot of Democrats are going to put up with much longer in the Senate.
Representative, why is this a priority? It seems like not a very big thing to make such a big fuss over.
Yeah, well, I think it's a priority on the Republican side because the Republicans feel as though, and I feel the same way, that, you know, why should an employee, why should it be a requirement to be an employee to pay union dues? And many times those dues are going to things that employee doesn't feel is that they're philosophically in line with.
Was it easier to do because this is public employees?
Correct,
I
believe so,
Is that why
yes.
this made more
Yeah.
sense? I mean, if you're a
Yes.
private company, if you don't want to work at a private company, go work at another one, right?
That's exactly
You have a right
right.
to work anywhere you
Yes,
want to work.
Yes. Yes.
Actually, were you surprised that this was this seems to be the main labor issue that was passed this year, and it doesn't have that big of an impact really on many things? Did you think something else would be a priority over this, or were you completely unsurprised?
I'd say I wasn't totally surprised. I think seeing what happened last year, I'm not surprised that it came up again as a priority. But you know, one thing I think we hope is that we don't end up like we did at the end of session last year, where everything shuts down.
Sean, last question on this. If after 2 years of a Republican supermajority, that all that passes actually becomes law, is this one part of paycheck protection affecting public employee unions, it would look to me like labor, Democrats in the Senate did some pretty good work. And it was no sweeping changes to Missouri labor law. It seems like it could have been much worse.
Well, I think donors like David Humphreys and others would certainly like more anti-worker attacks passed. So that's true. But I think what your question speaks to the bipartisan opposition to a lot of these attacks. And that hasn't been just Democratic, and it hasn't just been union member. There has been a growing recognition over the last couple of years that we all do better when we have a strong middle class. And these bills would undermine that middle class.
Part of that's the bizarre part of the Joplin wing of the Republican Party that seems to hate success and winning.
Those are your
It's an
words, not
odd
mine.
thing. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems to get more bizarre all the time.
Yeah.
Let's talk about something that is more meat and potatoes for Missourians. Soil and water tax. This is something that people have been paying whether they know it or not. What are they getting for it, and does it get renewed?
It does get renewed. That's, I think, a big, good part of the soil, parks, and water tax. It's a tax that, again, comes up every 10 years. It's 0.1% sales tax, something that's been overwhelmingly supported by Missouri voters every time that it has come up in years past. It was originally passed in the 1980s. It does some really important things. Not only does it support our state park systems, but it also supports our soil and water programs that really do a lot to, one, keep our soil on Missouri farmland instead of putting it into our lakes, rivers, and other waterways to send it downstream. And we like to keep that soil, of course, on our farmland to keep our farmland productive, as well as keep our waters clean. And so it's up again this fall, and so we're hoping that Missouri voters again overwhelmingly support this tax.
Representative, this move through seems pretty uncontroversial.
Yeah, it is. I believe it's very uncontroversial. It's good for rural Missouri. It's good for state parks, and I think it's a good thing.
Blake, do you see any unforeseen Tea Party opposition in the legislature to putting this on the ballot?
No, but I have to tell you, the soil tax reminds me of another tax that was authorized by the voters originally. It's been reauthorized 3 times, and that's the St. Louis City earnings tax. We were talking a moment ago in the green room about why is it that there's a different standard when it comes to legislators legislating in other districts outstate than there is in the city of St. Louis. Senator Nasheed, Senator Keaveney, they are the only senators in the Missouri State Senate that represent the city of St. Louis. They represent the constituents that have reauthorized this tax, a tax on their own constituency, on their own earnings, time and time again. The soil tax should not be controversial. The earnings tax should not be controversial.
Sean, do you see a correlation between the two? I mean, it seems like one tax seems to be careening towards very little opposition. Other tax had serious attacks on it now. Do you believe they fight off the earnings tax this year?
Well, I think both of these are examples of government working well. When we talk about serious opposition, it's an opposition from one person on the earnings tax who has a great big checkbook. Yep. So I think both are going to pass overwhelmingly, and it'll be good.
Well, I think, though, you have Republicans that run on cutting taxes, and then people are shocked when they cut taxes, or they run on being pro-life, pro-gun, and then they're shocked when they pass pro-life, pro-gun bills. People are generally against these taxes, but it seemed to be a thing where the politics of it for a rural Republican is very easy to be against the earnings tax. You can cut a tax that doesn't affect you. But it looks to me like if you go out and you oppose the mayor on a gun docket, you oppose the keeping the Rams, you do consistently things that hurt the city of St. Louis's ability to manage its funds, you're going to see the mayor not coming back arguing against your changes. You're going to bankrupt the city, and that's going to be the state's problem.
Well, I think the support is there from the people of St. Louis and the people of Kansas City for an earnings tax that supports their public safety, that supports their parks, and a high quality of life. So there's certainly more loud opposition, but I still think the voters aren't going to be swayed by that.
You don't see any validity to the part where it does inhibit growth in the business community in the city of St. Louis?
No.
You think that is that worth? Do you see, Representative, the argument is that if you got rid of this earnings tax, you would see more economic growth in the city, a place that needs it. Does that argument carry the day this year, or are we building up to a bigger fight in coming years?
It could be a bigger fight. I don't know what that fight will be, but it could be a bigger fight. You know, the one argument that I've heard against it, against the earnings tax is, you know, if I don't live in the city, but I work in the city, then I'm required to pay that tax.
And there's some court decisions that are questioning the validity of those things.
Correct.
But it goes back to, do you believe, a citizen, whether in St. Louis or Sedalia, if they want to tax themselves extra and put that money towards something, the state should stay out of it, or do you think they should eliminate it?
I think it should be left up to local control.
Actually, Farm Bureau generally is a local control group. Do you believe this issue is this a spring training game, I guess, be timely for a bigger game later, or is this real? You think this really goes this year?
Good question. I wouldn't say that I'm an expert on the earnings tax and the debate that's going to happen probably soon, but I could see this one coming back. Even if it goes away, I could see this issue staying around for quite some time.
Representative, let's talk about something that everybody seems to be an expert on, and that's the presidential primary. It's coming to Missouri March 15th. Trump mania, I guess, will hit the shores of the Mississippi. What do you make of this phenomenon that is Donald Trump that just seems to, no matter what he says, it grows?
Oh, I think it's just an indicator of the frustration that the people feel in the nation. They're frustrated with politics, they're frustrated with politicians, and they're frustrated with the way things are going in their world.
Sean Nicholson, you've got to love this. I mean, people are literally talking about the size of parts of their anatomy on Republican debates. You've got to get popcorn and love the show, right?
So I have mixed emotions. So there's
I think the happy emotion might weigh out here.
So there's a spectacle, but then there's something very real and troubling when you've got Donald Trump who won't separate himself from support from a KKK leader. And it takes him question after question after question and a couple of days for him to decide, you know, maybe I should back off with David Duke. So there's the horror and the spectacle, and then there's something truly troubling about what he's trying to tap into and who he's trying to build a coalition with.
Seems like that of the 20 outlandish things he said, that may be not. I don't think Donald Trump supports the Ku Klux Klan, Blake Lawrence, but I do think it is I mean, he has said some bizarre things and done some things in these debates that are really odd, and his popularity grows, and it not just grows among Republicans or Tea Partiers. He's bringing in Democrats and independents that I think they like his toughness.
Donald Trump is very sexy right now. Everyone wants to talk about Donald Trump and his body parts, as you say. But Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio are not saying, from a policy perspective, anything more moderate or more conservative than Donald Trump. I mean, they're kind of all right there. A very kind of chauvinistic idea about the American identity, a very kind of narrow view of what the government should do. And I don't really think that there's any headline from the policy standpoint here that's any different than what we've seen from the Republican Party for the last 3 decades.
Sean, I'll say this. One thing that I've picked up that I've keyed on is he talks about these trade deals. Trade deal after trade deal. And all you've seen is, I don't see Chinese jobs coming to America. I don't see Mexican jobs coming to America. I see American jobs leaving. And you could sit in a think tank and talk about free trade and all this stuff. Well, that's fine. But in West Butler County, we have to be a little pragmatic. Go to New Madrid today and ask them if they want a fighter punching the Chinese in the face for them, and I think they'll say they do. I mean, there is something to he's talking about trade issues the other candidates don't talk about, and from a pragmatic perspective, have these been good for our country?
Well, I don't think we're picking from a buffet. We're picking a person to be the most powerful person on the planet. And we don't just get to have Donald Trump's trade policies. If he's elected, we get the entire package, and it's pretty terrifying.
But Jay, don't you think, though, there is a part of this that it sounds free trade, all this, and maybe those are good things, and people can sit in these think tanks and produce papers that 8 people will read about them. But in the real life, you go to New Madrid, where people have lost their jobs because the Chinese have flooded a market, a commodity market. They take advantage of us. There's 34 senators that talk about creating jobs, right, and taking on the Chinese. One senator, Doug Leibler, has fought the Chinese and won. Don't you think people want some toughness? And don't people need to take a second look at these trade deals and say, does this work for us?
Well, yeah. I mean, people want to see a strong leader, and there's no doubt about it. Trump puts out strong leadership, or at least that's the way it appears. So. I think that's probably where he's getting most of his supporters, from people who are craving to have a strong leader, and we don't have that right now.
Ashley, if you look at the latest Scout Remington poll, Donald Trump's doing very well in rural Missouri. A lot of your members. Do you see that amongst membership and leadership in Farm Bureau, that the way he describes his views is something they can relate to?
Well, I think he relates to a lot of folks, and rural Missouri is not, excluded from that category. I mean, if you want to see some angry people with politics and politicians, go to rural Missouri and you'll find them. So I think that the anger that is driving him nationally is exactly reflected in a lot of my members, as well as others. But our membership is very diverse. Rural Missouri is very diverse. I think we have their support for a lot of candidates, but not surprisingly, there's a lot of support for Trump as well.
Hillary Clinton seemed to eke out some victories over an actual socialist, calls himself one. Does she play at all in rural Missouri?
It's a good question. I think if you put her up against Bernie Sanders, she obviously does fairly well in rural Missouri when given the choice. So yes, but I think he is, frankly, terrifying to a lot of people because he is a self-proclaimed socialist. So I think that drives them. Quick
prediction of the time we have left. Is Donald Trump stoppable?
Absolutely not.
Sean Nicholson, is the Trump train, does it stop anywhere besides a nomination?
I think he gets the nomination, and then he loses big time in November.
Absolutely.
Can anybody stop Donald Trump?
I hope so.
Can they?
Can.
Interesting. Yes. The one elected official says he can. And we'll leave it right there for this week in Missouri Politics, and we'll see you next week. I want to thank everybody at Hannibal Days for watching. Very, very glad you had us here. This week in Missouri Politics, brought to you in part by Sterling Bank.